Hey everyone, a quick note as we get into this episode. Shortly after recording, our guest, Shelby Saville, moved on from being the CIO at Spark Foundry to becoming the CEO of Starcom US. All her insight into the role of a CIO still stands for our conversation, and congratulations to Shelby on her new position. Shelby Saville has built most of her career rising through the ranks at global holding company Publicis Group. And after many years in executive positions at Spark Communications and Spark Foundry, she's most recently been serving as the Chief Investment Officer at Publicis Media US. Shelby speaks to me about her role and shares candid insight into what her job as Chief Investment Officer is, what she spends her time on, how she decides which partners to meet with and work with, what's important to her to stay on top of in the new year, and more. Let's dive into this episode on the role of a CIO in the agency world with Shelby right now. I want to ask you possibly an unreasonable question, Shelby. Can you give me the abridged description of what a Chief Investment Officer at Publicis US is responsible for?
Sure. And it's actually a very good question because I think a lot of people don't always know. And sometimes I get questions like, are you investment for Publicis like you do their mergers and acquisitions? Do you do media investment? What is it that you do? So my job as Chief Investment Officer is to really take all of the media dollars that we're spending in the marketplace as a holding company and figure out how to leverage them as a whole for the goodness of all of our clients. So which dollars do we need to take in the marketplace in a consolidated way to get more value for a client than they would be able to get on their own, or they would be able to get with just an individual agency, that the holdco role means something. It's also not just how much we invest, but how we're investing. So how are we thinking about what we do direct, what we do on platform, what we do with data, what we do with technology, and are we really developing our investment capability and our investment within our agencies to be as future forward as we need to be to deliver our client results. And so it's really looking at everything we do invest and how we invest it. And I always say like everything in between of that. So it's everything everywhere all at once, just to make sure that we're leveraging our dollars as a holding company appropriately for our clients.
I was thinking for a second, my initial inclination was a Chief Investment Officer from the media lens and not the Chief Investment Officer of an IBM or some other company in another space. So that is tracking for me. Because you have such an extensive history, specifically in the Publicis family, and I see you've had a series of different managerial roles, and pretty recently, before you became a CIO, you were a president. Can you also distinguish, because I think this is one more thing people are actually not that familiar with, what really separates what you did as a president versus the work that you have now moved to as a CIO?
Absolutely. So before I was Chief Investment Officer on the Publicis level, I worked within one of the brands. So I worked within Spark Foundry and I was heading up their investment inside of an agency. So I was really focused on specific clients under that agency umbrella. How are we doing with the investments we were doing for them? How are we connected into the holdco in the investments that we're doing? It was really when I moved over to the holding company level that I took on the Chief Investment Officer of PMX or Publicis to really look across every agency that we do, every channel that we buy, and make sure that we're leveraging that investment versus specifically looking at a subset of clients inside of one agency, if that helps.
More just high-level questions for you. Who does a CIO report to? Who do you engage with the most regularly in your day-to-day?
Yeah, I would say I engage with a ton of different stakeholders within the group. I report more specifically to the CEO of PMX or CEO of the group to make sure that everyone at the holdco level is doing what we need to be done for our clients. But stakeholder-wise, at any given day, I can be talking to the CEO of an agency inside of Publicis. I can be talking to their heads of investment inside of Publicis. I can be talking to any one of the clients, to the CMO level, to the head of media, head of marketing. And then I'm also engaging externally to all of our partner stakeholders where we are spending dollars. So I always say that although I report very specifically into the CEO of PMX, at the end of the day, the people that could call me or need something or that I'm really reporting into to the work that we're doing is really vast across the board, whether it's holdco, client, or even external marketplace.
I think you've now answered somewhat my next question, which was how much are you interfacing with clients? And it sounds like regularly. There's a lot of interaction with them. Publicis at the holding company level is so massive. How are you figuring out who to interact with? What are you looking to glean? It's hard for, I think, a lot of people who are not in a position like yours to begin to think about what that process looks like for you. So is there some additional detail you can share about how you determine how to use your time for that type of client interaction?
Yeah, so it's a vast network and a vast majority of clients to actually interact with. And I will say, Publicis is a very client-first organization. So it is always, if a client needs something, they move to the top of the queue on what I'm working on that day. So if they need something, we will jump into it, whether it's our biggest client or if it is a new client in the network or if it's a mid-sized client that has a particular challenge that I can help solve. The client is really the number one thing that we focus on and look at, because if we're not delivering for our clients, they don't hire us and we aren't doing the work we want to do. I would say then the other point in time is really internal. So making sure that I'm supporting the other stakeholders, whether that again is at the brand level, so one of the agency levels, or it's inside of one of my centralized investment teams. But I will also say that probably, I wish it was 30%, 30%, 30%, like a third, a third, a third. But a lot of times it tips one way or the other. But then the other balance of that is marketplace. So how are we helping our partners succeed and navigate the group? Because that is one of the toughest things. One of the biggest things I do a lot of times for partners who we're working with is actually just help them navigate. Like, who's working on what account? Where do you think opportunities are? Where do you believe that we are bringing something unique that can get matched up with a client that has a challenge? And can I help navigate you to that conversation? The navigation of the group is probably one of the biggest pieces that I offer up to external people outside of Publicis, because I do know, just having been in the Publicis family for over 25 years, I actually know how to navigate the group pretty well. And then even internally, I got a text on a Saturday recently from someone at one of our internal agencies that said, I don't know where to go with this, but I figured I'd start with you. Who does XYZ? And I was able to answer it. And I was like, that is part of my job. It's just sometimes to say, oh, you're struggling with something, you don't know who to go to. Try this person, and maybe that person can help you. And I hope more times than not, I'm right in putting someone to the right place.
I think about my days at Publicis, and I was working on a very, I would say, advanced account in the sense that there was a lot of openness to testing new types of technologies. Now, it's been a long time since I've been at Publicis, but there was a lot more disparity as far as embracing advanced technologies at that time. I'm guessing that's safe to say. There was many clients who were probably still not doing almost anything in the digital space. I remember we were offering a lot of added value to consider digital opportunities at that time. And I know it's been a world of change since back then. So I prefaced that to ask you this question. Even though I'm sure many, many clients that are in the Publicis family are open to advancement, everyone is in a different position as far as what they can embrace, what the actual brand not only is open to, but what they're capable of embracing. To what extent are you a part of those types of conversations? Because in theory, everybody wants to embrace change, but everyone doesn't have the setup to embrace it. So to what extent are you a part of those conversations and advising clients at those higher levels?
Yeah, we do a lot of advising in that piece specifically. Things like data readiness. So where are you at in that journey? How sophisticated are you right now in how you're using things like data and technology? And then how sophisticated do you want to be? And what could the impact to that business be? Because a lot of times we have to have the conversation around the effort versus the impact and what's worth it to test and to try and to evolve into. And there are some brands that have high momentum to getting as advanced and sophisticated as possible. And then other brands that aren't quite there yet. But sometimes they may not need to be there yet, or the course of their business and what they're currently doing. And they may have made a big bet and doubled down on something specific to their business. It's taking attention away from really that evolution. And that evolution may come just a little bit later. And understanding that roadmap is really important, to not put every single person to say, if you're not doing this, you're not advanced. every brand has a different trajectory based on their business situation and the outcomes that they need to have, as well as going back to data readiness. We talk a lot about data. It all depends on what they have first party, what they want to marry that with, how can we help them? And sometimes we can accelerate their data readiness. Sometimes they're in a really good place and we're just adding to that. But we do spend a lot of time just figuring out where the client's at, and then a real, true, demonstrable business impact should they move forward into a more advanced phase, versus moving every client forward just to say that they've moved forward. Because a lot of times it takes a lot of time, effort, and money on the client side to do things that we want to make sure at the end of the day that they're actually going to pay out.
I know you've always been in the holding company universe. If I understand that correctly, I don't think you've worked for a mom and pop shop from an agency perspective. So I bring up this next question, which is, in smaller shops, sometimes the information is going bottom up, where somebody who is more operational or hands-on keyboard is getting information because they're the ones who are first interacting with vendors or new technologies, understanding and vetting the potential of that and the potential viability for unique brands. And then maybe it's flowing upwards. Even at basis, there's many instances in which that happens. In other instances, it's coming from the top, and then we're being advised to consider it. Just given the breadth of the portfolio, what is kind of the way that the information is moving towards you and moving away from you as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's something we think about a lot. And people are surprised, especially external people, to realize how bottoms up we are actually. Because we are comprised of a holding group of many agencies, and those agencies exist for a reason. And the reason they exist is that they are so deeply embedded in our client's business. So the example you just gave could be that a trader that works on the business got a really cool piece of technology and thinks it'd be great for that business and works with the client on whether or not they should test and trial that. That happens very organically at the agency and the client level. What we don't do that often is say, we think this is so interesting at the Publicis level, we're going to push it down to every agency. Now, that said, we do oftentimes look at things that we say, this seems like it could solve a lot of challenges. We're going to get you navigated to the right people at the agency to evaluate this for specific clients, so that then they can take the information from the top down, but they can decide bottoms up if it's going to work for the client, and then make that decision on a more organic basis so that it truly fits like the bespoke solutions that our clients oftentimes need. And I think people are surprised because they think at the holdco level that like, I'm just going to make a sweeping decision on a partner or a technology, and then everyone's just going to follow suit and do that. But client needs are so nuanced and so specific, especially by channel or by technology, that we have to allow people that are really close to that client to make decisions that make the most sense for them. And a lot of times that means that those teams spend a lot of time looking at very specific new innovations, new technologies that could solve the specific thing that their client is trying to accomplish. At the holdco level, we look at things that are much broader, honestly, that could fit a lot of different clients, as well as things that are just simply interesting that we're curious about to see whether or not this has some traction. And then again, we just navigate it into the agency because we need those people on the ground with the client to actually make the decisions.
Want to react to one thing you just mentioned, which is sometimes reacting to something that's interesting and bringing it back to clients. Is there anything that's transpired recently that you have found interesting, even if it's not a specific vendor, but just a category that you feel is a priority at this moment as we move into a new year?
So right now, and this will feel like a very pat standard answer, honestly, but I mean, I'm looking a ton at everything that's related to AI, just because I think weeding through that and understanding what may be demonstrable right now to change how a client is looking at their media strategy, it is key and paramount for me at my level to take a look at what those things might be. I would say right now what's interesting with AI is I'm spending more time with clients showing them cool work tips and tricks and things to do AI to make their work life a little easier, not necessarily their marketing at this moment, besides, AI that we're using in terms of platform functionality and whatnot. But I would say I'm looking most closely at things like that, because if it is a specific tactical thing, that is really done by the agencies. When I'm looking at things that are going to have more demonstrable industry shifts, those are the things I start to lean in on to say, it may not be this partner or that partner, but certainly seeing the technology that they're looking at and what they're developing for gives me a good viewpoint for things we got to be prepared for in the future.
It's probably a relief to hear you say that, actually, in your position, that we have to also have somewhat, I want to say, reasonable expectations of what AI can bring to the table at this moment, especially relative to the incredible breadth of vendors that want to offer something that's AI forward, but maybe in this moment doesn't pass the sniff check. And this was something I definitely want to ask you about, your chief investment officer. A lot of people want to talk to you that are on the sell side. And I imagine many of them have not asked you all the questions that I have asked, to put it lightly, but they know they want FaceTime with you. How should people approach you in a way that is going to be valuable for your time and their time?
I think very similar to what you're doing. I think I'm surprised how few questions people will ask me. They will come in to want to show, this is what we have, this is the technologies we've got, this is our offering, this is our inventory source, whatever it might be. And they'll come in, with the sell of what it is they want to sell. But very rarely are they asking me questions first to say, like, having a meeting with me, what does that mean to them? It's like they almost want to check the box. If I talked to the chief investment officer and I showed her what we have, that's great, but it doesn't necessarily lead to things unless you have an understanding of what you're actually asking or needing from me. So I think people should ask as many questions around, what is your role with newer partners? We haven't seen, I love people when people come in and say, we have not seen any traction inside of Publicis. If I show you what we have, can you give me feedback on why that might be and who I should talk to? Those are my favorite meetings, because I can absolutely do that. What's very hard when someone says, I have the coolest new thing I want to show you. And then they show me and I have to say, not the coolest new thing. We've seen 4 other new things that look very similar and people aren't buying you because this feels like you're kind of white labeling someone else's thing. And we need things that are really ownable and new. I think there's just not often enough questions asked to say, what kinds of things are you trying to solve for clients? What kinds of things at the holdco level are you trying to dive into a little bit more? And, or what about my product does or does not resonate with you? My favorite question to ask partners back is, I'll say, what are you surprised we're not doing with you? Or what are you surprised that you don't hear in conversations? Rarely do I get back the question of tell me what about this resonates and what about this makes you go not that interesting. I think people are afraid sometimes to hear the answer, but that answer can be really helpful, I believe.
I think if I don't ask you those types of questions, and I imagine this happens rampantly, and I think you've suggested as much, that people will get that golden opportunity of speaking to a CIO, this coveted meeting that they desire. And then, and I'm not saying you do this, Shelby, but then they can get ghosted because it just didn't go the way they wanted it to. And then they're surprised.
Yeah, I often tell people, I'm not sure what to do with you. When we've had those meetings where, it's interesting, but mildly interesting. It maybe solves 1 or 2 challenges. And I might navigate them to say, hey, talk to this account or this account. Here's a good person to talk to. And they'll circle back around 2 months later and say oh, we didn't get too much traction. Can we have another meeting? And, I try to be as accommodating as possible, but sometimes I'm I simply don't know what else to do with you because I don't have a good understanding of what's unique or where your company's going, or you were actually just so niche and solved only one specific thing for a category. And if those brands aren't interested, there's not really much else that we can do at the holdco level.
So now it's also clear that taking a lot of meetings is not only something people desire to do, but it's also something that you do accommodate with regularity. But at the end of the day, there's only one of you and you need to be selective. How do you guide what you're going to say yes to? I imagine somewhat of an answer is going to be, it has to be unique and new. And you mentioned the AI piece as an area of interest, but are there any other guiding principles or trending areas or just priorities that you think about before you say yes to a meeting?
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally a yes person, so I say yes to way more meetings than I should. So I appreciate everyone. I've had to reschedule 90 times because I said yes and then we had to move it around. I think honestly, I try to say yes in a couple different scenarios. One is just a large partner already because we need to spend time with them. Two, someone who has a really interesting case on a client of ours. Like there have been a couple companies that have come and said, hey, we just did some interesting work directly with XYZ client. I want to show you what we did. Like those will get high priority because I want to see the work that they've actually done on a client. And then the third, honestly, is just someone who really approaches it with a solution first pitch. Like I love when someone will say, the best thing we do is we solve this problem for clients, or we drive this kind of outcome for marketers, or we have case studies that show this, something where I can see something tangible. If it's way too top level of a pitch, a lot of times I'm like, I just don't know yet what to apply you to. But if someone's got an interesting offering and can say, you know, this is for this kind of business outcome, or we're going to show you case studies, or something where I feel like I can walk out of that meeting and have a little nugget of something new in my brain, I will often take the meeting. It's when it's someone who is, you know, cold calling to a degree that they're not really showcasing what they can do, or they're just very similar to 4 or 5 other people. So unless you have something that I can like tangibly grab onto, like a client case study or something within a category, it's hard to prioritize that meeting.
It's great advice for people to latch onto. There are areas in the greater advertising industry that there are some solutions for, but there still feels like there's a massive void. I think about, I hate to say it for the 100th time or 1000th time, the cookieless future, measurement and planning in the television space, just measurement in general. And you may find a lot of good partners out there, but I feel like there's a lot of room for improvement. So I'm curious from that perspective, are there problems that you are seeking to solve through advisory, either from clients or through these meetings? I'm just curious where there are holes that the entire industry is trying to solve. How do you try to tackle those challenges to take us to the next level?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're always so focused on client business outcomes that what we're trying to look at a lot of times is how do you connect a media or buying metric to an actual business outcome? Because, you know, we'll talk about campaign performance, and sometimes that can be as sophisticated as say, we know that this had an impact on the business, you know, to the terms of XYZ. And a lot of times it will go to campaign performance will be it delivered X amount of impressions, or it delivered reach, or it was at this, you know, CPM or cost per point, and that those media metrics don't always equate to business performance. And so I think any way that we're helping to get more sophisticated on that link, you know, we all complain about things like modeling, for example. It has its place and it has its power, but sometimes those models can go down to just extreme efficiencies and impression tonnage. And we don't really know if that's impacting the consumer the way that we want to, or that's really driving business incrementality. And so any way that we can get better models, more direct metrics, any way to link media exposure and the level of media exposure, the kind of media exposure to the actual business incrementality. Because I think oftentimes we can have great reports that look amazing and they show great numbers, and then the business is not seeing the incrementality that they want to see because we've just tried to link a media metric and impression and a buying metric on efficiency to being that drove their business performance. And then they look at it and say, yeah, you're saying I'm up 10%, but our sales haven't moved in 3 quarters. So I think we're constantly trying to figure out how do we get smarter about how we link those things together, because that ultimately helps. You know, my job is how are we leveraging all the money in the marketplace to get the best pricing and the best access and the best incremental value for our clients. If we can't equate that to delivering an advantage as it relates to the incrementality on their business, that gets to be very difficult to know where we need to push on those pressure points to change the pricing model or the value we're bringing back. So if we can get that knowledge on the business performance, it helps us understand how to negotiate better, frankly, because we know we're negotiating on the right things versus just defaulting to negotiation on price or negotiation on tonnage or impression level or even, in a bid world, bidding on something that might not be as valuable as it looks in the report because it's not actually driving any action.
So you've brought up such an important priority for every agency, which is looking at media performance versus business outcomes. Again, in a position like yours, this is something that needs to be evaluated across all the accounts. So this is, again, kind of connecting back to your larger role. How is this information being rolled up and shared with you so you can evaluate it in a fair way? Because this has to be just a rolling conversation as more and more technologies are unfolding. Sometimes you just don't know until you test. And again, because of the volume, it's got to be a kind of a complicated process. At least it feels that way to me in this moment, not doing work like yours. So just curious to get some insight into what that looks like for you, Shelby.
Yeah, I really believe that's why we have such a bottoms-up approach, because you have to be able to test and do the things that are right for your specific client's needs and business, meaning it goes down to even how does your client measure success? What kind of data do they have at their fingertips to say whether this did or did not impact the business? Impacts how you set up your campaign to then link it to that business outcome. If we did too many decisions on what we will lean into, innovations we care about, technologies we think are interesting, we pushed all those down from the center or from the holdco level. We'd be pushing down things and approaches and technologies that maybe don't work for an individual client, or we would de-incentivize people to actually test new things because it would be, we have these 3 things and you're supposed to do these 3 things. Where in reality, we want client A to be testing one thing and client B to be testing another so that we can actually see what's performing and what works really well. In terms of how it's shared, we actually have, we call it the investment collective. So we have a group of all of the investment leaders across the agencies that meet regularly, and we share those kinds of things. So if someone has been working with a partner that's like just killing it and like hitting it out of the park, it's a moment in time for them to be able to say like, hey, everyone, I think you should take a look at this partner because they, haven't worked with a lot of people yet, but they're doing a really good work here. So go ahead and test and try that. And I always say the best thing that's going to get you more traction in Publicis is a great case study with one of the agencies inside of Publicis, because everyone's really competitive. So when I was at the agency level, what I loved and hated the most was when another agency would show me this amazing case study of something they did with a partner I hadn't heard of and I hadn't worked with, because I'd be like, oh man, they like got there first and they realized this is a really cool thing to do. And so when partners would come and say, let me show you what your counterpart at other agencies are doing with their clients, I would pay a lot more attention than if they just showed me some blinded case study that was, from the industry somewhere that may have come from anywhere, because I would want to be like, oh, like how did they figure that out? And I haven't yet. So we really keep, again, that decisioning on testing, learning, and linking all of that to business outcomes at the agency client level for that reason, so that it can be as specific and innovative as that client needs.
Maybe taking an off ramp a little bit, but again, jumping off of something you said, what are the markers of a great case study?
Good question. I think that it is a good case study when it clearly defines a business challenge. There's a lot of case studies that don't. So clearly says client was trying to achieve X, or client needed to see incrementality, or client needed to see this age group respond to their products, whatever it is, a clearly defined business challenge, a very clear role that the technology or partner played in trying to solve that business challenge. And then the outcome of that, like it's actually really simple. It's challenge, the role they played, and the outcome in that role. It's really not more complicated than that, but sometimes you can get convoluted in all of those things. Like you either not have a very clear challenge, or it's not clear what your role was, that you might be one partner out of 10 and it's not clear like what you brought to the table. And then not really having an outcome that has a numeric part to it.
It's shocking how many terrible case studies there are. The ask seems simplistic, but somehow the delivery is so regularly not valuable for the recipient. And to your earlier point, so often you're looking for somebody to be solution-driven, solution-leading, and a part of that solution could be highlighting a case study, especially a case study that's going to resonate with that agency stakeholder. But that's one more mystery where you have these mysteries with the cookieless future, with measurement, and case studies can be added to the list as well.
Yeah.
I am wanting to ask you like one or two questions also from a leadership perspective. Again, you've kind of grown up in the Publicis family for all of your career, I believe.
Most of my career. Yeah.
What has helped you navigate that flow all the way to where you are today?
I think, and this may sound pie in the sky, but I'll unpack what this means. I think that it has been really curiosity. And I say that only because I haven't ever really had in my mind, this is the career trajectory that I want. I want to do this, and then I'm going to go on to this, and I'm going to go on to this. When I look back at my career, my beginning career was just, heavy learning. Like I was just in the media program, learning, buying, planning, all of the things. And it was the point when the digital group was started. And I said, I don't know how to do any of that. Like I took one meeting with someone, our client wanted to do something on the internet. And they were speaking a language that I barely understood. And I was like, oh my God, how do I not know any of this? So I went into that group because I didn't know any of it. I thought that was like super interesting. I've always been really interested in the thing I don't know, like pivoting to the thing I don't know. And then, I did that for a number of years. And then as digital really started to impact every channel of media, I started realizing although I've done it a tiny bit in my career, I've never done real broadcast, television, buying strategy, whatnot, or, local or any of those other channels. And so when I got the opportunity to run all investment for Spark, that allowed me to not just look at what was going on in digital, but actually start to marry that with every single channel, whether it was an analog channel or a digital channel. So I've always kind of pivoted to that thing that I just find really interesting, because I find if I find it interesting, I really kind of zero in on it and learn it really fast and then start to actually have an impact on it. And so I've navigated it by actually just following true curiosity. I haven't navigated it by being really good with politics or networking or being okay, I need to go get to know this person in leadership or this person in leadership. I've legitimately just been that sounds interesting. Why don't I do that for a little while? And then saw where that took me. And there were days when I can't believe it took me here, because I feel like sometimes I have to admit to people I didn't really have a plan when I started. But it was legitimately saying this is interesting. And this is an additive skill set I don't have today that could be valuable for a team or a client. And let me just rabbit hole into that for a little bit and really learn how it works and how to do it and what it is, and then how to apply it to a client's business. And you build on that over time. You build the muscle of different capabilities and different skills. And then that at least helped me be more versatile and move into different positions, which positions you well when you get into a senior level, when people are thinking about what role you could play or who would be good for an open senior position. It made me just a very versatile leader because I had learned so many different parts of the organization.
As we head into what's going to be the start of the 25th year into the millennium, there are things that haven't panned out the way that we thought they would, especially across the course of 2020 during this lockdown period, when there was all this Web3 and correlated curiosities from clients that they weren't ever, I think, able to adopt because the application opportunities were not robust. And I think that for that reason, they've fizzled away. So I wanted to land the plane on asking you about hype. How do you, in your position, kind of maintain called a BS meter so you can clarify, okay, clients, we want to inform you about these things. This is our hot take right now. These are adaptable opportunities versus these are some things where we're not so sure. How do you take that question as we head into 2025, especially after a few years when there's been a lot of hype?
I always remind myself that at the end of the day, we are trying to make human beings do something. Every brand, if it's a service they want someone to sign up for, product they want them to buy, a trip they want them to take, a car they want them to buy, anything they want them to do, we are actually trying to make human beings do something that's very complex. human behavior is inherently complex. No matter how much we look at data and targeting and behavior maps and all of those things, they are unpredictable and they are complex, which is why everything always seems like, oh, we thought this would happen and then it went a different direction, because at the end of the day, humans are unpredictable and complex. I come back to that phrase all of the time when I'm looking at any of these opportunities and technologies, because it helps me to weed through to think, does this feel like something that the majority of humans are going to want to do? And are they going to want to do that today, tomorrow, or in the far future? Where do I think that fits on the trajectory? And what is the risk level to humans to take this action? And when would they likely take it? That helps to think about, is this something that is probably going to be an opportunity for our client years in the future, once people get much more comfortable with this kind of technology, then more the masses will do it? Or is this something that actually is solving a really interesting human challenge right now? And a lot of people are probably going to jump on and do that really quickly. It just helps to think about the human element when deciding kind of the BS meter of, is this a huge opportunity for today? Or is this something that there probably has to be behavior or societal shift before it would happen, before people would really do this? A good example is banking and micropayments. It was years and years and years ago, maybe 10 plus years ago, when people were saying, things like Venmo would be big and that you would do things like social commerce. And yes, that did happen. And it became, and it is a very big thing today. But 10, 15 years ago, getting someone to link their bank account into a social app was not yet a thing, because you're messing with people's money. And there's a risk and a real difficulty for people to get their head wrapped around linking my money into something that was still a relatively newer behavior. So thinking about the trajectory of consumer behavior and human behavior as it relates to the capability of technology are not always in sync. And so understanding when they might be in sync is one of the ways to determine when it really is a mass scalable opportunity and when it's something that you do or do not want to test into at that moment.
A lot of good insights for people to really reflect on. This has been a insightful conversation for me, and I'm walking away with a lot of good talking points and thinking points. So really appreciate the time today, Shelby.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Shelby Saville, Chief Investment Officer at Publicis Media, for the conversation on media investment. Shelby beautifully verbalized a lot of things about her work and the real motivators of media buying teams and organizations. Words to heed for anyone on the sell or buy side to reflect on why they partner with who they partner with. That's it for this episode. I'm Noor Naseer. More Adtech Unfiltered on the way.